The snowplow didn't stop that morning, just swerved and left a barricade in front of my dad's driveway. Claire Hartley, 38, schoolteacher, daughter, caregiver, just trying to keep her father's surgery on track. The smell of split pea soup filled the house, mingling with the creak of her mom's old filing cabinet, where she found a faded map, lined in red ink. Some folks use holiday lights to spread cheer. Claire used hers to light the truth. What would you do if someone tried to erase your family, one violation at a time? A snowplow veered past the Hartley driveway, then stopped short. An orange barricade with the HOA's emblem now blocked the entrance. Claire Hartley stared at the blockade, her gloved hands tightening around the grocery bags she'd just hauled from the trunk. The biting wind whipped against her cheeks, bringing the scent of snow and diesel from the idling plow. A red cardinal flitted from the birch tree near the mailbox, its song slicing through the brittle silence. Her breath caught, not from the cold, but from the echo of a memory. That bird always reminded her of Mom. She set the bags down in the snow and marched toward the barricade, boots crunching. Two HOA volunteers, Marcy Whitaker and Doug Jensen, stood nearby with walkie-talkies and laminated badges that looked freshly printed. Claire waved an arm. "What's this?" Doug barely turned his head. "New safety policy. Snowplows can't clear drives with non-compliant easement designs." "Since when?" "Effective today." Passed in the emergency HOA board meeting last night, Marcy chimed in, barely looking up from her clipboard. Article 14b, Section C, Easement Landscaping Compliance. Claire's jaw tensed. "This is our driveway." "Not entirely," Doug said, his smile tight. "The HOA owns a portion under shared easement guidelines. Dolores can explain if you want to take it up with her." Claire exhaled sharply and trudged back toward the porch, every step heavier than the last. Her boots slipped once on the icy path Frank usually salted before sunrise. But this morning, he'd been too stiff to bend. Frank met her at the door, his flannel pajama pants tucked into wool socks. He leaned on the frame, the familiar lines on his face drawn deeper from pain and fatigue. "What's all the commotion?" he asked. She nudged the door open and handed him a grocery bag. "They blocked our driveway." He blinked. "Blocked it?" "New safety policy." Her voice carried a brittle edge. "Apparently our bushes are violating some easement clause." Frank's face flushed. "Those roses have been there since your mother planted them. Dolores has a real talent for rewriting history. She's rewriting the rules now." He shuffled to the counter, dropping the bag with a soft thud. "How the hell am I supposed to get to the clinic Thursday?" Claire dropped her coat onto the hook. "You won't. Not unless we fix this." A loud thunk rattled the mailbox outside. Claire opened the door and peered through the glass. A young HOA courier in a blue windbreaker was already halfway down the street. She stepped outside and pulled the envelope free. It was cream-colored, formal, with the HOA's red insignia stamped across the front. Inside was a typed notice: "Violation of HOA Code 14b-C, landscaping along shared easement impedes emergency snow clearance. Immediate rectification required." Claire read it aloud, then handed it to her father. He didn't say a word. He just sat down slowly on the bench in the hallway, his hand resting over the hernia wrap beneath his shirt. She made her way to the kitchen, placing a pot of split pea soup on the stove. The smell filled the air, earthy, thick, and nostalgic. Frank sniffed the air. "Smells like 1976, he muttered. Claire smiled faintly. "You always say that." She opened the lower drawer of the old oak cabinet, one that hadn't budged in years. Inside, wrapped in a cracked leather folder, were rows of manila envelopes, old receipts, school certificates, and newspaper clippings. At the very bottom, tucked between a tax return and her mom's clipped recipe for rhubarb pie, was what she didn't realize she'd been searching for. A folded paper, yellowed with age, marked with red ink. A property deed. And attached to it, a copy of a hand-drawn map dated 1997, signed by 5 names, one of which was Franklin R. Hartley. The map outlined shared easements, driveways, and original HOA zones before Dolores's term. Her fingers trembled as she ran over the name. "Dad," she called. He looked up. "Why didn't you tell me we had this?" "I forgot we did," he said. "But I knew she didn't have the right." Claire took a breath. Then she leaned back against the cabinet, her knuckles still gripping the old map. A soft snowfall began again, brushing against the window panes. Outside, the barricade stood like an accusation. But inside, Claire's pulse steadied. Something in her shifted, not rage, exactly, but resolve. "She wants a fight?" Claire mutters. "Fine. Let's remind her who this land really belongs to." At Irene's diner, the clink of coffee mugs and low hum of gossip paused when Claire walked in holding a folded envelope. The diner was already buzzing despite the snowstorm outside, but her entrance cut through the warmth like a cold draft. She nodded politely toward the counter, brushing flecks of snow from her coat. The bell above the door jingled once more behind her, sealing the morning chill out. Rosie wiped her hands on her apron and leaned against the counter. Well, she said, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. "You look like someone with a mission." Claire placed the folded envelope beside the cup. "You could say that." The smell of sizzling bacon mingled with pine-scented cleaner. Christmas lights hung half-heartedly above the windows, only half of them blinking. A faded photo of the 1981 town council hung above the jukebox playing Winter Wonderland. Claire glanced at it and spotted a younger version of her dad, standing proud next to a row of other founding HOA members, back before the board had become what it was today. Rosie slid the mug toward her. "How's Frank?" "He's holding up," Claire said, voice low. "Surgery's still on for Thursday, but now we're not sure how we'll even get out the driveway." Rosie grimaced. "Dolores again?" Claire nodded, unfolding the HOA violation notice. A crease ran down its center, worn from the previous night's rereading. "You ever seen anything like this?" "Oh, honey," Rosie said, leaning on her elbows. "She's digging where she shouldn't." Dolores never liked pushback. Claire sipped her coffee. The warmth helped steady her nerves. "I found a copy of the old map. My dad's name's on it." "That map," a voice chimed in from the corner. Mrs. Malloy sat by the window, scarf draped over her shoulders, a crossword puzzle half filled in front of her. Claire turned. "You remember it?" "I remember the fight about it," the older woman said, eyes sharp behind thick glasses. "Back in '07, there was talk about a missing page during the HOA elections. Some thought it had been, conveniently misplaced. Dolores won by 3 votes that year." Rosie scoffed. "She fined me $20 for having a pink flamingo on my lawn. Claimed it violated visual uniformity. Can you believe?" Claire smiled despite herself. "I still have the flamingo," Rosie added. "Named her Phyllis." They laughed quietly. Claire felt something uncoil inside her. She wasn't the only one. Before leaving, she slid a $10 bill beneath her mug. Rosie raised an eyebrow. "Mom used to tip you the same," Claire said. "Said kindness deserved consistency." Rosie pressed a hand to her heart. "Your mother was good people." Claire buttoned her coat. "Mrs. Malloy, if I wanted to find any records from those old elections, where would I start?" The librarian thought a moment. "Town hall. The clerk's vault. Ask for the original easement maps, they're not in the public database anymore." Claire jotted a note on the envelope: "Town hall, clerk's vault, original maps." Outside, the wind had picked up. Snowflakes spun like feathers across the parking lot. The old lampposts blinked orange against the gray sky, barely lighting the icy roads. She returned home an hour later, boots soaked and fingers stiff. Frank was dozing in his recliner, the TV playing some holiday special from the 90s. Claire slipped upstairs and opened the closet in her mother's sewing room. Dust lingered thick on the top shelf. She pulled down a hatbox marked Zmaz Cards 2001. Inside, Beneath yellowed envelopes and dried garlands, sat a wide-mouthed mason jar. Her breath caught. The jar held a rolled sheet of parchment. As she opened it, the paper crackled in protest. It was another hand-drawn map, this one more detailed than the one from the drawer downstairs. A red line marked the edge of the property, sweeping around the driveway, and there it was. Dolores Caulfield's signature. Stamped. Dated March 1997. But that wasn't what made her fingers tremble. A post-it note, curled at the edge, clung to the bottom corner. It read, in her mother's handwriting. Keep this if she ever comes for the land. 3 HOA notices now hung on Claire's porch like unwanted Christmas ornaments. They flapped stiffly in the wind, one laminated, one already wet from snow, and the last curled like it couldn't stand its own nonsense. Claire didn't bother removing them. Let the world see how absurd this had become. Inside, Frank's den was dimly lit, the soft hum of a space heater barely keeping the chill away. Snow tapped the window panes like impatient fingers, each gust rattling the glass in its frame. A map of the Hartley property stretched across the rug, weighed down by 2 coasters and a flashlight. Beside Frank's recliner sat a stack of dusty binders, one of them titled HOA Bylaws, Revised 2007. Another, Americans with Disabilities Act, Summary Notes. Claire sat cross-legged in sweatpants, her laptop open, fingers dancing across the keyboard. ADA Title III, Equal Access to Private Residences During Medical Necessity, she murmured aloud. Frank sipped cocoa from his favorite mug. Faded white letters read, Grumpy Grandpa. He leaned back with a sigh. Your mother used to say, fight quiet, but fight smart. Claire smiled faintly. I'm trying. She tapped on her phone and opened the photos she'd taken that morning, 3 SUVs parked halfway across their easement, all bearing HOA decals. One even had a board member on patrol magnet on the side, crooked and peeling. Violating the same code they cited me for, she said. If I get one more notice about visual disharmony, I might stencil snowflakes on our trash bins. Frank chuckled. Your brother would have painted them neon green and blamed the elves. Claire looked up at the framed photo on the bookshelf. Benji, age 14, caught mid-air on a skateboard as he launched down the old sloped driveway. He would have turned this whole thing into a stunt. She stood and stretched, then gathered the notices from the porch, laying them out on the table. Let's play their game. The next morning, Claire stood in front of the town hall clerk's desk with a clipboard and a polite smile. I'd like to request the official notice and minutes regarding the HOA's easement policy change. The clerk blinked. Those should have been filed under public adjustments. Do you have a date? Claire handed over the printout she'd found on her mother's old USB. The policy had supposedly passed in September, but there were no matching minutes in the vault index. That's odd, the clerk muttered. Or intentional, Claire replied quietly. Back at home, she composed a formal complaint citing ADA interference, carefully referencing her father's upcoming medical transport, the snow conditions, and the HOA's non-compliance examples. She attached the deed, 5 time-stamped photographs, and a highlighted section of the 1997 bylaws. Her tone was calm, surgical. She also mailed anonymous copies of the original deed and map to 3 neighbors she suspected Dolores had coerced into silence, folded neatly inside holiday greeting cards. Let's see what cracks, she muttered. That evening, as she taped her ADA notice beside the mailbox, headlights swept the drive. A dusty gray sedan rolled up, stopping short of the barricade. Chet Winston stepped out, clipboard in hand. He was as square-jawed and stiff as she remembered from high school gym class, where he'd once given her detention for wearing striped socks. Miss Hartley, he said, eyeing her tape measure, you've now modified your signage without prior approval. Claire didn't flinch. Just making things legible for emergency services. He scribbled something and left without another word. Back inside, Frank was staring at the Jared map again. His cocoa had gone cold. There's something I never told you, he said suddenly. Claire sat down beside him. When your mother and I helped found this HOA, We thought it'd just be snowplows and community potlucks. Back in '96, the budget was a mess. Dolores, she wasn't president then, came to me for a loan to cover the insurance. I didn't ask for it back. But she never liked that. Why? She hated owing people. Especially people who don't show off. Claire processed that. She resents you because you helped? Frank nodded, almost sheepish. Maybe she's just been waiting to settle that score. They sat in silence for a long minute. Outside, a fresh dusting of snow had begun to coat the barricade again. Then the mailbox clanged. Claire rose and opened the metal box. A crisp, certified envelope sat inside. The seal read, HOA hearing scheduled, December 16th. Dolores stood at the HOA podium, draped in tinsel, declaring, "This year's lighting ceremony will be HOA compliant, no personal displays." The artificial wreaths strung along the folding tables twitched slightly with every movement of the radiator vent. Town Hall's multipurpose room smelled faintly of musty pine and powdered cider. Styrofoam cups sat in neat pyramids, steaming as volunteers poured. A vinyl banner that read Season's Greetings from Bridge Ridge Falls HOA sagged in the middle, taped too hastily. Claire stood near the back, a container of homemade fudge balanced in one hand. She'd placed it gently on the refreshment table earlier, just like her mother had done every year. Familiar faces nodded at her. Some smiled sheepishly, others hesitated, eyes flickering toward the front where Dolores Caulfield held court like a holiday monarch. Dolores adjusted her red scarf, woven with gold threads, and flipped a page on her clipboard. All yard inflatables must be approved by December 5th. Colored lights are restricted to HOA-assigned hues, white, gold, or blue. Any deviations will result in a $75 citation. A murmur rippled through the room. Claire caught Rosie's glance across the room, just the slightest roll of the eyes, then a sip from her cider. Rosie had warned her weeks ago, she always hides power plays under peppermint. A balding man in a reindeer tie raised his hand. What about window candles? Battery-operated only, Dolores answered briskly. No blinking features. Harvey Penn, sitting stiffly near the side, adjusted his glasses and leaned forward. His face was pinched with something between discomfort and quiet rebellion. Claire waited until the Q&A portion before raising her hand. Was this vote on decoration enforcement shared publicly? Dolores blinked. It was part of the November update. I didn't see it on the HOA site or newsletter, Claire said, keeping her tone measured. Which would be required by policy, correct? A few heads turned. Someone near the back whispered, "She's right." Dolores gave a tight smile. Perhaps there was a formatting issue. We can look into it. Claire nodded, saying nothing more. The damage had been done. Questions had been planted like seeds under frost. After the meeting, as people filtered out, Harvey approached slowly. "Merry early Christmas," he said, slipping a wrapped peppermint into Claire's palm. Beneath it, cold plastic, a thumb drive. She looked at him. He just winked. Outside, the snow crunched softly under boots. Claire tucked the drive into her coat pocket, passing by Dolores who chatted animatedly with a cluster of board members. Claire offered a thin smile. Dolores returned it like a woman slicing fondant with a steak knife. Back home, Frank was stringing a single red bulb above the porch. It glowed defiantly under the HOA banner that still clung to their mailbox. "You know," he said, stepping down from the ladder, "your mom used to hang those old red bulbs no matter what the HOA said. Called them Rosebud Rebellions." Claire smiled and stepped inside, boot heels clicking softly on the tile. She made herself a cup of cocoa and sat at the kitchen table, sliding the thumb drive into her laptop. Dozens of folders. One titled, Memo_internal_drafts. She clicked. Scrolling. A PDF opened. The text was dry, meeting recaps, budget notes, line items for mailbox repainting. And then. Hartley property remains a visual deterrent to neighborhood cohesion. Both residents, particularly the daughter, are liabilities to the neighborhood's aesthetic value. Claire's breath caught. She scrolled further. Dates lined up, 2 weeks before the barricade, 4 days after Frank's surgery request. Dolores had called them liabilities. She didn't realize her hands had clenched until her fingernails dug crescents into her palm. She rose, crossed the kitchen, and pulled open the lowest drawer in the old hutch. Inside, her mother's address book, still tabbed with faded pink post-its. Claire flipped through names. One stood out, Naomi G., VT Legal Aid. She clicked open her email, attached the files from the thumb drive, and began typing. Claire forwards the files to a pro bono legal contact she found in her mother's address book. The snow fell harder than it had in 5 years, and the HOA plow never came. Claire stood by the frosted window, arms folded over her cardigan. Beyond the driveway, Bridge Ridge Falls disappeared into white. Flakes whipped sideways, painting the trees in gauzy silence. The porch steps glistened with ice, untouched since midnight. Frank shuffled in from the hallway, gripping the doorway. They'll withhold more than access this time. The space heater buzzed gently in the corner. Power had flickered twice since dawn. Claire lit a stubby candle on the windowsill, one of the last from a box labeled Wedding Extras. She'd almost tossed them after Benji passed, but something had stopped her. The driveway remained untouched. No sign of the HOA snowplow. At 9:20 a.m., Rosie called. They hit Hillcrest. Every board member's house cleared by sunrise, she said. No plow to Pinecrest, not even to the Malloys. Dolores claims equipment limitations. Claire gritted her teeth. Thanks, Rosie. Frank sighed. You'd think we were lepers, not taxpayers. By noon, the phone rang again. Caleb Dorsey stood at the back door 10 minutes later, his parka powdered like a sugared donut. In his gloved hands, 2 heavy bags of rock salt. I stocked up last winter, he said, eyes shifting. Didn't trust them then either. Claire thanked him and helped scatter the salt along the steps. Frank remained inside, the icy porch too risky. Caleb bent to install reflective driveway markers, driving the stakes into the frozen ground. What's that? Claire asked. Frank's old unit emblem, Caleb replied, tapping a medallion etched with a bald eagle. Figured it might slow them down. Later that evening, candlelight bathed the den in amber hues. Claire sat cross-legged on the carpet, Frank's old HOA folder spread across the floor beside her. The air smelled faintly of wax and cinnamon from a forgotten holiday candle. She turned a brittle page dated August 1995. In cases of infrastructural obstruction, local residents may exercise temporary governance for purposes of access and safety, until such time as official services resume. She reread it twice, then whispered, self-governance. Frank leaned forward from his recliner. Say again. Claire showed him. They never removed this clause. It's buried in the emergency annex. Means if they fail to clear access, neighbors can act. By noon the next day, she drafted a neighborhood emergency response plan. 8 households signed it within hours. The Malloys. Rosie. Caleb. Even Mrs. Abernathy, who hadn't left her porch since 2011. Claire attached the clause copy and filed a certified letter to the county board. Another went to the local newspaper. She made sure one landed squarely on Dolores' desk, CC'd in bold ink. That evening, as the storm eased, Claire stirred a pot of soup on the stove. Frank sat nearby, watching the news through faint static. You still have that cranberry bag? Claire asked suddenly. She'd promised to drop them at Irene's diner before the next freeze. Her mother always brought some each year, hand-picked from Franklin Marsh, wrapped in cloth. Irene used them for her holiday pie. Claire found the bag tucked behind the pantry rice and sealed it with twine. Then she climbed the attic stairs, unsure what compelled her. Boxes labeled MOM 1980s lined the far wall. She opened one, hands brushing faded fabric and brittle newspaper. Tucked between a scrapbook and recipe clippings, she found a photo, her mother and Dolores in matching park volunteer uniforms, arms linked in front of the same birch tree that now guarded Claire's driveway. 1986. Smiling. She stared for a long moment, then placed it on her desk beside the deed copy. The next morning, a knock shattered the quiet. Claire opened the door to swirling cold, and Dolores, flanked by 2 police officers. There's been a formal complaint of obstruction. Claire unfolded the original deed, and taped it to the front window with Christmas lights framing it. The page crackled softly in her gloved hands as she stepped back to inspect her work. The pale blue ink of the Hartley name stood bold beneath the HOA seal, years faded but not erased. Twinkling red and green bulbs glowed around the glass, reflecting Claire's breath in the frigid morning air. Frank watched from the porch rocker, wool blanket over his lap, a thermos of cocoa warming his palms. "You always said truth shines better than any light show," he whispered, voice gravel soft. Snow crusted the lawn like powdered sugar as Claire and Frank worked side by side. Just past the birdbath, a clear plastic tent arched like a small greenhouse, Claire's community truth display. Inside, laminated copies of easement maps, faded photographs, and letters from HOA founders were pinned neatly. Each document told a story. This land had roots longer than Dolores' tenure. Mrs. Malloy arrived mid-morning, bundled in a plaid scarf, cheeks flushed. "Found this in my keepsakes," she said, holding out a framed photo, the 1983 HOA Formation Committee. "Frank, you had more hair. Dolores had less venom." Frank chuckled. "Balance of nature, I suppose." Claire hung the photo beside the 1995 clause she'd discovered, fastening it with tiny gold clothespins. Around the tent poles, she tied red and gold ribbons, her mother's favorite. They fluttered gently in the breeze, like sentinels of memory. By noon, neighbors began drifting in. Rosie brought ginger cookies and stuck a note on the corkboard, "This family shovels the truth, not just snow." Another visitor, Mr. Gray from 2 blocks over, approached hesitantly. "My son uses a wheelchair," he said, voice taut. "They denied our ramp too. Said it didn't match the neighborhood symmetry." His hands trembled as he added a faded permit rejection to the display. Claire handed him a cup of cocoa with 2 marshmallows. "Free speech comes with marshmallows," the sign read above the thermos stand, scrawled in permanent marker. By late afternoon, the transparent tent buzzed with quiet solidarity. Couples in boots, single parents with curious children, retirees with walking sticks, all left notes, photos, or simply stood reading in silence. Snow crunched underfoot, and the warm hum of community spread like a fire finally catching. Frank shuffled down the porch steps slowly, clutching a manila envelope. "Off to mail this to the Gazette," he told Claire. "Typed wouldn't do. I wrote it longhand, let them see it came from someone who remembers when HOA meant volunteers, not tyrants." Claire kissed his cheek, proud. As the sun dipped behind the birches, Chet Winston appeared. His breath clouded in front of him, his HOA-issued parka zipped too tight. He walked slowly through the tent, stopping at each photo, each annotated note. He lingered longest at the founding photo, the young Frank, Dolores in the corner, smiling like she hadn't yet learned how to weaponize rules. Chet found Claire near the cocoa table, where she was rearranging cups and lids. His voice came low. "I saw the memos," he said. "And I saw your dad clear trails for years without asking credit. That's the kind of neighbor I remember." He reached into his pocket and handed her a folded piece of paper. "I'm resigning. I won't be part of this anymore." Claire opened the note. His signature trembled at the bottom. A rush of air left her chest, surprise chasing relief. "Thank you," she said. Chet turned, his boots leaving 2 crisp lines back toward his truck. Claire returned to the house just as snow began falling again, soft, reluctant flakes. Frank sat at the kitchen table with 2 mugs waiting. "You ready to run through it again?" he asked, sliding her a yellowed notepad. Claire sat. They spoke softly, rehearsing her opening for the hearing. Each word shaped by resolve, each pause measured. Outside, the tent glowed like a lantern against the dark. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A single message: your hearing has been moved up. Be at the town hall tomorrow. 9 a.m. sharp. The town hall was quiet except for the ticking wall clock, until Dolores entered with 2 lawyers and a smirk. Claire sat alone at the long table draped in burgundy fabric, a single folder before her and her mother's bluebird brooch pinned to the collar of her coat. She didn't look up when Dolores' heels echoed against the linoleum floor, nor when the 2 suited men flanked her like bookends. At the rear of the room, a few residents shuffled in, hats in hands. Caleb Dorsey nodded as he took a seat, arms crossed. Beside him, Rosie whispered something to Mrs. Malloy, who dabbed her eyes with a lace-edged handkerchief. The HOA board sat stiffly behind folding tables arranged into a makeshift bench. Each had a plastic nameplate: Bennett, Carla, and Joel. A gavel sat untouched near the center, like a decoration that no one had ever dared to lift. Claire inhaled slowly. Caleb's words echoed in her mind: you don't have to be loud to be heard. Just be clear. Bennett cleared his throat. We're convened regarding the complaint issued by the HOA against Claire Hartley. Dolores, you're opening. Dolores rose in one graceful motion, eyes hard. The resident has repeatedly violated HOA decorum by posting inflammatory signage, erecting unauthorized structures, and obstructing snow access. Furthermore, her recent display of private documents constitutes intimidation. Claire waited. When Dolores sat, the air felt like pressed paper. She stood. I'd like to respond by submitting Exhibit A, she said evenly. She held up the original deed, crisp, notarized, dated 1979. This predates the formation of the Bridge Ridge Falls HOA. The easement in question is not subject to HOA modification under Article 4.1 of your own charter. Claire laid down 3 identical copies, highlighting the signatures, including her father's. Next came Exhibit B, the 1995 Emergency Clause. Exhibit C, the HOA memo referring to her family as aesthetic liabilities. The board members leaned in. I'd also like to call Harvey Penn to speak. There was a hush as the HOA treasurer rose, adjusting his BOLO tie. I served on the original board, he said. We were meant to be neighbors helping neighbors. But over the years, some folks started picking who deserved help. Dolores tensed. One of her lawyers whispered something, but she waved him off. I've seen selective enforcement, Harvey continued. Holiday fines for some, exceptions for others. Claire's not the first to push back, just the most thorough. From the audience, a woman in a lavender coat raised her hand. Claire turned, surprised. I have copies of the 2007 and 2011 newsletters, the woman said. They encouraged personalized decorations. Dolores wrote one of them herself. The board took the stack from her carefully. Claire approached again, this time laying down a final folder. These are 7 signed affidavits, she said, from current residents who were pressured to remove ramps, sell their homes, or cease long-held traditions, all without proper notice. I believe this constitutes a pattern of intimidation and targeted policy manipulation. Joel blinked slowly. Carla scribbled something on a notepad. Bennett's eyes narrowed, flicking from Claire to Dolores. Claire stepped back, hands clasped. Her heart pounded but her voice had not wavered. At the back, Caleb smiled faintly. On Frank's tablet at home, the screen showed his daughter standing tall beneath the board's seal. He dabbed at his cheeks with his sleeve. Dolores, still seated, shifted uncomfortably. One lawyer whispered again. Then Bennett leaned forward, folding his hands. We'll reconvene tomorrow for a ruling. But Dolores, we need to talk. Privately. The sun broke through melting snow as Claire stepped back into town hall, but this time, the crowd stood and clapped. She paused in the doorway, stunned. Light poured across the wooden floor, catching on paper snowflakes taped to the windows and the silver thermos marked, Community Cocoa, Take 1. Someone had set out trays of cinnamon rolls, and the scent of sugar and nutmeg curled around the laughter and chatter like a warm scarf. Mrs. Ramirez, the new interim HOA chair, greeted her near the front with a firm handshake. "Thank you for showing us what we'd forgotten," she said. Claire made her way to the same table as yesterday, though today there was no folder clutched in her hands, no undercurrent of dread humming through her spine. In the second row, Frank gave her a small wave and a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. His cane rested beside his chair, boots clean, pants pressed. The board came in without fanfare. Bennett adjusted the mic with a cough. "We've reviewed all submitted documentation," he began. "The Hartley driveway lies outside HOA jurisdiction. All prior notices and threats of enforcement are hereby voided." A murmur ran through the crowd, of relief, of satisfaction, of something long overdue. "Additionally," he continued, "an independent audit has found irregularities in internal records. Miss Caulfield is relieved of all HOA duties, effective immediately." Claire looked across the room. Dolores sat stiffly in the back, her hands clasped too tightly, the usual smirk gone. She didn't speak. Just watched. "We will suspend current HOA governance for a 30-day audit," Bennett said. "In the meantime, we will temporarily revert to the original 1983 charter, a simpler framework built on neighborly cooperation. Mrs. Ramirez and Mrs. Malloy will oversee this transition." Applause followed, and not the polite kind. Mrs. Malloy, beaming, leaned over to Claire. "Your mother would have baked an apple pie the size of Vermont if she were here." Outside, the cold had softened. Snow melted in glistening patches along the sidewalk. Frank rose slowly and took Claire's arm as they descended the front steps, newly cleared, salted, wide enough for his cane to tap down confidently. At the bottom, he stopped. "Let's go see those lights," he said. They walked to the car together, the town square buzzing behind them with neighbors talking about food drives, pet rescues, and replacing HOA bylaws with something written in plain English. Claire opened the passenger door for Frank, then rounded to the driver's side, and froze. An envelope rested under the windshield wiper. Cream paper, embossed seal. Her name written in elegant cursive. She opened it carefully. "We heard what you did," it read. "Let's talk. Office of Senator Alyssa Cameron." The words swam for a moment. Claire looked back at the crowd, at Rosie handing out cinnamon rolls, at Chet helping a boy hang a star on the town's tree, at Mrs. Malloy laughing beside Mrs. Ramirez. That night, the Hartley house glowed, not in protest, not as a line drawn in snow, but in peace. Red and gold ribbons swayed gently on the porch railing. Claire placed a cassette into the old player by the window. Her mother's voice crackled through the speaker, warm and worn. "Merry Christmas, my darlings. If you're hearing this, it means you're home." Claire closed her eyes. And this time, she was. The morning sun returned to Bridge Ridge Falls, not just melting snow, but something deeper, a long season of silence. What began as a barricade across a driveway became a movement that reminded neighbors of their shared roots, and the power of one quiet voice refusing to be silenced. When rules are used for good, communities thrive. When they're misused, they crumble. Perhaps it's never too late to open an old map, light a single bulb, and remind the world that truth doesn't need permission to shine.